Welcome to the Battle Buddy Podcast with Keith McKeever.
Welcome back to another episode of the Battle Buddy Podcast. I have Dylan Sessler with me today, and we're going to talk a little bit about PTSD. And Dylan, he's got a book about the darkness of life, but I'll let him tell the title and tell what the book is about himself. So welcome to the show, Dylan.
Thank you, Keith. I'm glad to be here. I'm just happy to be here.
Well, go ahead and tell us first a little bit about your story. Who was young Dylan? What got you into the Army? What'd you do? Catch us up to where you're at today.
Yeah, it's a long story, so I'll try and shorten it up quite a bit. When I was 6 years old, I lost my dad to suicide, and it was quite a traumatic thing for me. Obviously, a father's relationship with the son and son's relationship with the father is quite important at that age, and so is having two parents. And I lost that. Right, it was a moment in my life where I felt, when my dad left that morning, I felt like I knew he wasn't coming home. Right. And I don't know if that's just a child's intuition of like, you always think your parents are never coming home again. But it certainly felt absolutely different than every other situation I've ever been through. And so
it's a lot of awareness for a kid of that age.
Absolutely. And so when that happened, it felt like a remarkable amount of guilt was laid upon my shoulders, a remarkable amount of regret and even shame with how his side of the family actually approached suicide. Right. It was a dark secret. It was one to be kept and not to be talked about because the religion was brought into it and looked at it as in, if you were suicide, you went to hell. And so from that moment on, it was very difficult for me to process through any of that because we couldn't have a conversation necessarily. Not only that, but now my mom's a single mom and she's trying to take care of two kids and support us and get us through. And, I think at this point in our lives, if you are an adult of any kind, you understand that your parents can't really necessarily be perfect. They do the best they can with what they're given. And my mom certainly did. She did the best she could. But we didn't always have a perfect life. Right. And beyond that, she got in a relationship with another man who, what she didn't know was he abused me and then also did the same to other people in my family. And so it was a very difficult situation overall, for myself in particular, because that was the next male role model I had in my life. And it was abusive, right? It was physically abusive to the point of, I'd go to school and I couldn't sit on my butt because that's where he would hit me, right? He would hit me from the small of my back all the way down to my calves to a point where I couldn't actually sit down. I had to sit on my hip. And it's just a really, not necessarily the physical pain wasn't the bad part. It was the psychological kind of representation of what that meant for me after I lost my dad, right? Because now I have this new man in my life and he's teaching me how to be a man. And what that really taught me was to completely negate the idea of pain, right? Get over it, get through it, suffer, right? Suffer in silence. And that mentality really drew me to the military because war is war. We all know that. And when you really dig into war, the necessity for suffering in silence is absolutely necessary. It has a purpose. And because of the nature of my dad's suicide, I chose to kind of craft 4 rules for my life. And it was, don't ever drink alcohol because he was an alcoholic. Don't do tobacco because he was also addicted to tobacco. Don't do drugs because he also had issues with drugs, and then don't commit suicide. Right. So I was actively trying to not be my father, but in all of this, right, with all of this trauma and all of these mental issues that came from, extreme amounts of guilt and shame and regret, I found myself really wanting to not live anymore. Right. And I would think about suicide every day, whether it was my dad's suicide or, as I grew up, I started to realize that I kind of didn't want to be here anymore. I didn't want to live. And I don't remember where that started, but I know that was a choice that led me to the military. And that's what made me choose the military, because I wouldn't do it myself, right? I wouldn't end my own life. And so I chose the military to do it for me in the most honorable way I could, because at the time, that was what I really thought was best for me. I thought being, as honorable in my death as possible would be the best way for me to live my life, as short as it was going to be in my mind. And so I joined the military, and unknowingly, I kind of just volunteered for every deployment that I could for the first few years. And I'm Wisconsin National Guard. So, I'm still active. I'm National Guard M Day. So I drill 1 weekend a month. But in the beginning, I didn't want to do that. I wanted to go to Iraq with the rest of the battalion. I missed out on their deployment to Iraq by a month or two with my basic training. And then because of that, I just continued to try and deploy and deploy and deploy. And I probably volunteered for 5 or 6 deployments before I actually got one to Afghanistan in Kunar. And I wasn't even reserved for, for sure. I had to wait until like about 20 days before the deployment to be confirmed that I'm actually going on this deployment, even though I'm training with these guys. So I was an alternate at the time. And I deployed and saw all sorts of things, right? I saw casualties. I just saw the unbelievable amount of stress that you get put under in a combat zone for, I was doing multiple jobs. I was an infantryman at the time, still am, but at the time I was a part of a security platoon supporting the PRT and the ADTs, which is like the provincial reconstruction teams and the agribusiness development team. So I was a security element for them. But when I went back to Kunar, because we moved a lot, I actually got tasked out to be also the S6 for the FOB, which is basically, I'm now the commo guy for about a 400 to 600 person FOB at any time, right? So,
And talk about a little bit of stress.
I'm an infantryman that knows a little bit about radios, and I'm the guy they chose. And so, yeah, like I'm thrust into this position where I have to figure shit out and just learn everything about radios, learn how to do crypto, how to, just do things that I've never done before in a combat zone where people are relying on me. And I never crumbled to the pressure until my body actually crumbled to the pressure. Like, I actually got ulcers in Afghanistan because I was working 20 to 22 hours a day and sleeping for 2. And I didn't really have leadership that was like kind of having any kind of oversight on me. So I was
nobody noticed the burnout, huh?
I was just doing, right? And I was just operating until my body, like, I found out one morning, I was like eating food and I felt good, right? And then like between breakfast and lunch, I felt terrible. When I got to lunch, I started eating again. I felt great, and then between lunch and dinner, I felt horrible. And then I started eating again at dinner and I felt great. And then between the hours of dinner and breakfast were some of the worst pain I've ever felt in my stomach. Because one of the things that actually supports or kind of shows you that you have ulcers is that if you eat food, it quells the bile in the stomach, versus if you don't have food in your stomach, it's literally eating you, and it sucks, right? And so I learned very quickly that I had some form of ulcer in my stomach, and it was literally eating my stomach lining. It was hurting so bad. So I had to go to the aid station and figure that out, but I never really stopped working, right? They gave me like 4 hours off, and then I was back on talk duty later that night. And it was just remarkable to kind of come away from that deployment and realize, you demob and they tell you all of this stuff about PTSD, and they tell you all stuff about trauma. And it was really the first time that I actually started realizing I wasn't traumatized from Afghanistan first. I was traumatized at 6 years old and 10 years old and 12 years old and 14 years old. And then I was traumatized again in Kunar, in Afghanistan, in Kabul, by seeing all of these things. And not only that, but what I'd done to my body throughout all of that. And then come home, and 4 days after I come home, after I'm learning all of this at DMOB, I tore my ACL on leave. And so the Army has to do what the Army does. And they took me from home after I just got home from a year-long deployment and sent me to Fort Knox to get ACL reconstructive surgery. So I'm 500 miles away from home. I know nobody. And I'm expected to be at formation 2 times a day on a leg that I can barely walk on. And I did that for 7 months, right? They gave me surgery about a month in, and told me I was going to be there a year. And I was appalled. I was like,
Wow.
I'm not going to survive here a year because of me, not because of any of what you can do. I can't be here for a year. And so that kind of inspired me in some way, and in a almost a false sense of inspiration of like, if you don't get out of here, you're probably not going to make it out, right? Like, because I'm sitting there with all of this trauma kind of laden upon me, and also this realization that if I don't overcome this, I'm getting kicked out of the one thing that I thought was going to kind of give me my outlet in life, right? The Army. And so I worked my ass off, right? I worked out every single day, 2 to 3 times a day. I was doing push-ups in my room. I was sleeping about 45 minutes a night for 7 months. And so, all that does to you is just mentally degrade you. It physically exhausts you. And so I don't know how I was operating, but I'm certain it was not on a healthy healthy routine, if that makes sense.
It definitely does not sound healthy. And those hospital environments are not known to be positive, uplifting environments anyway. But when you
Yeah.
have got trauma and other things you're trying to navigate through, that's almost impossible.
Yeah. And it was hard to, walk out of my room and realize that all I had done was tear my ACL when my roommate was over there having been blown up in a Husky 35 meters up a hill in Afghanistan with a broken back, a broken leg, severe TBI, PTSD. I mean, there was legitimate issues there. And I look at myself, through all of this, and I'm like, I shouldn't be here, right? Like, I shouldn't be in this place doing this thing, because there are people out there that need this far more than I. And I feel like I'm just getting in the way. So there's that feeling of inadequacy in that place. And so it just was not comfortable for me. And it's hard to look back and say I was wrong, because I still kind of feel that, right? And I don't feel that in a way of like, that's my fault. I feel like when I look back at that inadequacy was exactly what I needed to inspire myself at the time. And so there's an understanding of that was a necessary mentality. Was it healthy for me? Probably not, right? The feeling of inadequacy had survived my entire life. And so I came out of Fort Knox, really in a difficult place, a dark place, right? I had overcome ACL reconstruction. I'd come back, and, the Army, I'd taken a PT test, and I actually got promoted between then and the next time I tore my other ACL, which was almost
Oh no.
exactly a year and 1 month after my first one. So I just gotten promoted. I tore my ACL again for the second time. This time it wasn't as bad because I was home, right? I could recover at home. I could work through it at home. I could just continue living my life and actually feel like I was progressing somewhere.
You were also
Um,
prepared for that journey too, having
right.
gone through it already. Yeah.
And I had that understanding of this is what it's going to be like. And then a year after, I tore it again. Right. So I tore 3 ACLs. I only have 2. I got 2 reconstructions. The third surgery was my second reconstruction. And so it was right around that time of my third surgery where, I felt the worst I had ever felt. I had just broken up with my girlfriend. I felt like I was a burden on everyone around me. And I was just struggling through everything in my life. Right. Even though I was relatively successful, I was going to school. I was getting good grades. I was doing well in the military, even regardless of the fact that I was tearing ACLs left and right. Um, I was doing well. I was competing for the Wisconsin Army National Guard marksmanship team at a national level, doing well, helping them get, I think we got second place my first year. That was like 2014, 2015. And so I was doing well, but mentally I wasn't. I was allowing all of this to just fester inside of me because I had never talked about suicide. I'd never talked to anybody. I've never told anybody about what happened that day with how I felt about my father. People knew about it, but I didn't talk about it. And then I not only that, but I didn't talk about suicide itself, of how I felt like I should die every single day of my life for almost 20 years. And on a March day in 2015, I found myself coming home from school, and I found myself in a place of, this is it. I can't keep going like this. I can't keep doing this, and I'm going to break that rule. And I still remember the day of like sitting there with my Glock 34 in my hand, thinking about all of the things that I had done, all the things that I had, ruined, right? Because that's really what you think about in circumstances like that. And the question came to mind as I'm pulling the trigger, realizing, why am I here? Right? Why am I, I'm holding this gun in my hand with my trigger finger pulling about 95%. I feel like I was a millimeter away from this break point on the trigger, and I stopped. And I looked at, like, I felt like I was kind of in an out of body experience, looking at myself saying, why are you here? Why are you doing this? And I put the gun down for a moment. I sobbed, right? Like I'm just exhaling all of these emotions that I had been holding in for so long. And for the next 3 days, I really just thought about that. I really just gave myself a break, a 3-day break of trying to figure out what was the problem that brought you here. Because I'm always a why guy. Like I love to understand why things work, why things happen. And I looked at myself for 3 days and I realized I had never spoken a word about any of this. And so you've got this box of your mind and your body and who you are. And if all you do is input what you see and what you feel and what you understand, and you just think about all that's in there, and you never reveal it you've never opened it up to anybody, nobody ever knows what's inside it. Nobody actually understands how to help you because you've never given them an option. You've never given them a way to realize that. And that's so it kind of brings me to what my book has been, like where I've gone with this is really understanding why you should learn to speak your truth, why you should learn to understand what has happened to you. Because if you don't know where your failings are. You don't understand where, the things that you are uncomfortable with are actually the things that are where you need to place your focus, what you need to reveal to other people in some ways to get perspective, right? Because you need to have a different perspective to realize what's in my box is not good for me, right? What I hold, what's in the box, and then what's in the box within the box is also something that I need to open up and understand, so I can also show or find people that can help me understand it. And there's so much that I've had to address about me that has been a failing throughout my life, and respect myself throughout it, right? That's why my book is called Defy the Darkness, because you can't escape the darkness of life. You can't escape the fact that life can suck. It can be terrible. But if you learn how to defy that, if you learn how to find the beauty within the pain, find the beauty within the world, or the stress or the discomfort of life, you actually start to realize that you can place things aside. You can look past the stress. You can look past the pain. You can see what is actually worthwhile to look at. And that's not a development of ignorance. That's a development of understanding what you want to prioritize in your life and in you, because that perspective matters, right? Two people can go through the same experience and have vastly different outcomes, right? There's people that will go through the death of a father and do what I did. And then there are people that will go through the death of a father at 47 years old or 50 years old and realize, I can survive this. I'll be fine. But I went through it at 6 years old and felt like it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And now I've completely turned that around. And now I look at that moment and I realize not only my father's suicide, but my own. Those were two contrasting and paradoxical events, but yet both of them were essential to where I am now, in this place where I have a book that has helped, thousands of people at this point. I have a TikTok account that I, of course it's TikTok, but I've shared thousands of videos at this point and helped millions of people, right? I have almost 600,000 followers at this point, talking about things like suicide and mental health and trauma, sexual assault, war. I've talked about everything that I can possibly think of to help people understand themselves. And it's changed a world, right? It's changed my world. But that's just one piece of the puzzle of my life that I would have missed if I had pulled the trigger in 2015. I also have a wife, right? And this is the more emotional part of this, because I would have missed that, right? I would have missed meeting the woman that has shown me what real beauty is. But also I would have missed the baby that we're having in June. I would have missed that. I would have missed all of that. And that's a tragedy that would have befallen me without ever having given myself the chance to understand it. Given any possible discomfort that would have come through continuing on, you don't ever realize what you could miss if you don't keep going, right? And I can't tell people to keep going just because it's the right thing to do. I can remind them that there are stories out there like myself that I'm living proof that there is possibility beyond all of this pain. There's potential beyond all the discomfort and the self-harm that I've done to myself. There's so much more beyond the trauma, beyond the grief and all the loss, right? And it still befalls me today. I've lost, just in the last 2 years before we are, my wife is due in June. Before that, we lost 3 babies. And that's an incredibly hard loss for anyone. But it's especially hard when you've looked to this and especially me, I've looked at this my whole life and realized, at one point I never thought I'd be here, right? I never thought I'd make it past 25, but I certainly never thought I'd make it past 30. Now I'm 32. I have a wife, I have a stepson, I have a little girl on the way, and all of this stuff would have been gone. It never would have happened. And I would have thought I was right at 25 years old had I pulled the trigger. But now I look back and it's the only way I could have seen the perspective that matters here and realize how wrong I was to think I was worthless in any way, because everything that I've done here to create this conversation with you, I'm not worthless. But I had to prove that to myself. And I think that's the part that really matters about my story, is that there's a necessity for you to speak your own truth, to understand it and how you share it. Your narrative matters, right? If you express your narrative in a way that is what I did for 25 years, well, you're going to end up exactly where I was. But if you take the last 7 years of my life and you understand what I did, I promise you, when you really start to address your narrative, that might change, right? Your attitude might change. Your perception of the world might change. You might stop blaming people for everything that's happened to you, and you might start taking responsibility for the actions that you have. And you step out of, this feeling of betrayal that everyone's against you, the world's against you, the army's against you, the Navy's against you, whatever it
Is
is
that
that you're.
victim mentality?
Yeah. And you step out of that and you realize that you have had to survive things that have not been pleasant, have not been kind, but you also have a choice in all these matters, right? You have the choice of standing against the darkness, defying it and continuing to fight for a beautiful life that you have yet to create. And that's about as best a description of my life as I can give you right now. But yeah,
Wow, that definitely helps paint a picture. And a couple of things kind of came to mind as you were going through that. One is like the old uh, adage or whatever of lemons to lemonade, whatever. Had it here just a minute ago in my head, but you're taking something that's sour, bitter, it's deformed as you're squeezing it, but you add a little bit of sugar to it, and now something sweet and enjoyable. And then kind of tying in with your book, it's your book, yourself. The chapter of your life could have ended, but yet you've written all these other chapters since,
yeah,
right? Going through your marriage, the daughter on the way, all these other things, your career, the TikToks, like all those different things are just little paragraphs and chapters just adding to your book.
yeah.
And there's a lot of power in spreading your message.
Yep.
You just never know who's going to listen. You never know who it's going to help. I was just telling somebody the other day that when I started this podcast, this was just an opportunity for me to talk to other people, share stories, and hopefully some way help somebody out there, right?
Yep.
If I just help one person, it's worth all the time, effort, and energy you put into it. What I never expected was a few weeks ago that I literally had somebody in my home, in this town where I'm at, reach out to me and my wife and say, I'm trying to deal with my husband and his PTSD. And I am lost because I'm not a veteran. I don't know and understand all this stuff. Like, can you help? And my wife was like, well, you need to talk to Keith. So she messaged me because she knows both of us. And so I sent her a couple of episodes, a couple of resources. And I just never thought in my wildest dreams when I started this, I'm thinking in this giant world, United States we have, and in this world, we've got veterans all over the place, that it could help somebody anywhere. Never expected it would literally be in my backyard.
Yeah.
The first place that I hear of. And so, you never know. And of course,
Right.
TikTok is all over the place, and people consume that for hours upon hours at a time. Guilty.
Yeah. What's remarkable is your story is not not uncommon to me, right? Like I started this whole journey kind of wanting to prove myself that I could do it without the support of anyone around me, right? And so I started TikTok without telling any of my friends, my family. The only person that knew was my wife. And so I think the first time I had someone reach out that was like close to me was around like 100 to 150,000 followers. Um, they were a friend from high school, and he reached out, and he told me, he's like, man, I had no clue, but I'm telling you, like, I've been through this. I'm going through this right now, and I had no idea what to do. And we, we sat down, I guess through Messenger, and we just started, texting each other, just keeping each other kind of, keeping each other company for a minute. And it's remarkable that in this world of interconnectedness and how the internet exposes that, and yet also disconnects us. What
A lot
I've
of truth to
really,
that.
what I've really built is a contradiction to what a lot of people feel the internet is so disconnecting, because there's both disconnection of, yeah, we get into our phones so much, but there's also this idea that in a family unit there are people that are struggling with something that don't have the ability to tell their family. They don't have the ability to express that, either because their family doesn't allow it, like part of mine did, and then also because the same reason for myself is I didn't want to. I didn't know how to talk to people around me. And so as much as it might be disconnecting, it's also incredibly connecting on the back end as well, because there are people that reach out to me and tell me things, both in my client meetings and just via messages from TikTok and Instagram, where they tell me things they've never told anybody else before, because I'm safe, right? Because for the first time in their lives, they watched me on TikTok for long enough to think Dylan's safe. And they're not wrong. Like I don't take these things and I blast them over the internet and say, hey, check this out. This person's gone through this. Like I don't do that. And so they like there's this ability for these people to look at me and recognize that there is trust there. And that's an incredible thing when they don't have anybody else in their life that they can trust. They built that through a one-way conversation, right? That I spoke to them and they found me to be trustworthy enough to share these life experiences that no one else has ever listened to before. And so
sure, for a
that's,
lot of those people, it's a lot of weight off the shoulders, just getting
yeah.
it out there to somebody.
And that's an incredibly powerful thing to take recognition of, which, again, it's a contradiction to what a lot of people say, the internet's so disconnecting. It's not. You just don't know where to look for the connection. You don't know how to build the connection. And that's, if there's an issue in society today that is underrated and undervalued, it's the idea that we don't know how to craft a sense of connection because we don't know how to develop a sense of safely communicating, right? That's one of the things that I struggled with, is that I didn't think anyone could understand the day that I looked at my dad and I thought he's not coming home. I didn't think I could trust anyone with that information because I had so much guilt around it that no one had ever created a safe conversation for that to happen. And so that's what I do now, right? And that's what I study. That's what I pay attention to, because it's the very thing that I needed throughout life. And so if there's anything that I've learned, it's that we need to look at how we have conversations with people. And I do this with my son. I do this with my wife. And I want them to be able to share absolutely anything with me. And I don't just wait for it, right? Like, which is what I think a lot of people do. I actively tell them, both of them, if there's something I do wrong, I need you to talk to me. I want you to talk to me. And then when they do, I don't punish them, right? I don't, I don't, eh, I don't blow up on them. I don't become emotional. What I do is I sit there and I listen, even if it fucking hurts, right? And I do this with clients. I do this with everybody in my life. I've done this with my mother. I've done this with so many different people in my life. And I promise you it works, right? But you also have to have the ability to perceive and understand how to engage with that negativity that is coming at you, right? It's the defiance of that darkness that you have to understand how to do. Because if you just take on all of this and say, I am the problem, you're not going to survive, right? It has to be an understanding of, I understand your perception of things. I do. I really do. And I believe it. I believe you feel this is true, and I understand that. But here's my perception. It's not about negating someone else's perception of the truth and making it false. It's about just understanding that you have an idea of truth, and so do I. And now we need to come together to create consistency in both of those things, right? It's not about, like, I'm not here to tell Keith, I'm not here to tell you that you're wrong or you're false or your thoughts are crazy, right? All I'm here to say is, here's my truth. Here's my story. Here's my idea, right? And people are going to argue with that. And that's good, because that gives me an opportunity to learn whether I am actually wrong, or it gives me an opportunity to help them understand how to work with me, how to perceive me, understand me, listen to me, be friends with me, because that's my ultimate goal. I'm not here to kill people, right? Even though that's my other job in the military, right? Like I still am, I still am an infantryman. I'm a sniper section leader in the military right now, right? My other job is to kill people, right? That's literally what I do. And yet I fundamentally stand in opposition to that in the civilian life, right? Like paradoxically, I'm here to save lives on the civilian life, and I'm here to take lives in the military side, right? And so I fundamentally think both are necessary, because we'll never escape nature, right? I don't care how much idealism you think you have. We're never going to create a society that steps outside of nature and says we live in a bubble and we're safe, because at any moment, a 16-mile wide rock from outer space can change all of that and destroy this entire planet. And so we really don't understand the full perception of what nature can do to us in comparison to man, right? We think man is the most dangerous thing out there. It's not. It's nature, right? Like we don't have an understanding of what nature can do to us, and we don't have a respect for it. So we think we can control it. And the reality is we can't. And so being able to understand that we must stand in opposition to what nature represents, because nature is also in man, right? That's why murders still happen. That's why rapes still happen. That's why bad things still happen. Obviously, Russia's in Ukraine right now. Like, bad things happen. And so we have to understand that there's still a natural chaos to things. And in many ways, we need to be able to stand in opposition to it if we disagree with it. So it's
Couldn't agree more to that.
Yeah, and it's so underrated to be able to articulate your story and to understand it, and to really feel an understanding of your own truth.
Yeah, I think there's one good theme, to this episode so far, is to those out there struggling, is to share your story. That could be to your spouse, to your kids, to your parents, to your counselor,
To yourself.
To support group, to member of the clergy, wherever you feel that trust, whoever that person or that group is, go share your story. Because I know it helped me. Like the communication you were just talking about a couple years ago, I had an incident here in my house, and like my wife and my kids were like, no, you do this, 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 and this all the time. And then it didn't fit the definition of PTSD, the punching your wife and throwing her down the stairs, right? I wasn't violent, but I would have an angry outburst every now and then, or snap, or, very, very demanding sometimes on, all my kids, get the chores done. Like, why aren't you doing it? Like, different things like that, right? I realized that there's certain things I was doing that were not healthy. They're just kids, right? You can't expect to do a perfect job taking the garbage out.
Yeah.
You hope to get it in the can right. But anyway,
right.
So like through that communication that we had as a family, they sat down. It was kind of an intervention almost to me. And it was like, yeah, this is what you do, like going in your office, self-isolating, and, you work all the time. Like, you don't spend enough time with us. And it was like, okay, all right, my boys want me to spend more time with them. Right. So that sucks. That's incredibly painful. But I also realized they were old enough where I sat down and I was like, look, guys, I struggle. Like, here, like, my wife knows a lot of my stories, but my boys, they're old enough now. Kind of gave them a little bit more of the PG version of things. But I was like, look, here's where I deployed. Here's what I did. Here's the things I experienced in the military, blah, blah, blah. Some people have it worse, whatever. But like, this is what I experienced. This is how I feel. These are the things that I struggle with, right? And we just trying to, still a couple years now later, still try and navigate it, right? I know I still have problems. I know I isolate myself in my office too much sometimes. Sometimes I might snap, and, I get that. I was never a drill sergeant, but almost like that drill sergeant kind of mentality of like, snap to action, gotta react. Let's do this, let's do that, whatever. But that communication was huge. It helped shift my mindset to see what was going on that I didn't quite see.
Good for you, right? Like that is an example to lead by, right? That's an incredible story right there in itself, because it shows what I think a good man represents and a good person represents, but especially men, right? I think men have an overwhelming struggle with this, because we have a different relationship with pain, right? And so one of the, not only pain, but emotional pain as well. And so what I love about what you just told me is that, one, you were able to listen, right? Which is incredibly hard for men to do when they're being told they're wrong, because the first thing that we want to do when we get told we're wrong is get angry. And we want to get aggressive. That's just one of the things that we kind of were taught to do as especially our generation, I think. And so it's incredible that you have the foresight to allow your people, right? The most trusted people in your life, your children and your wife, to sit down with you and say, these are the things that we see and observe and notice, and we want to share them with you, not to insult you, but to help you, because we want you to be part of us. And that's scary, right? Like, that's incredibly scary for both of us, right? To realize that people want us, right? It's almost a scary thought, especially when you come out of the military and realize that in the military, all we saw was we lost people, right? Like, whether you've been deployed or not, you lose people, right? You lose people that just don't make it in the military, that don't want to be there anymore. You lose people that can't handle it. They choose suicide, or the PTSD comes out and destroys them, medical issues, right? You lose people in so many different capacities, and that's not including war, right? And then you go to war, and then you lose people on a different level, right? You watch people like die, right? You watch people become casualties and become mangled and amputees. You see all sorts of different things that, this person was never the same again. And so when you come home, you kind of internalize that, and you say, I don't want to get too close to people, right? And so there's this relationship that you have with yourself of like, I'm not going to get too close to people, but also I'm going to kind of engage in interactions that say, don't do that, because it can become a really bad thing, right? And that's why we become so aggressive in some way in how we command, right? Of don't do that, right? Why are you doing that? That's a terrible idea, because, in Afghanistan or in Iraq, a bad idea would get people killed. And so we can't necessarily turn that off every time, until we actually start to recognize it. And I think the fact that you have pushed into the self-awareness to do that is remarkable. I mean, that's the beginning of healing in any capacity. And the fact that you're able to have those conversations, the fact that you're able to recognize yourself, right? Even if you are still self-isolating, you recognize it. And in some capacity, that guilt is necessary for you to say, you know what? I'm not spending enough time with my kids. I got to stop.
Yeah, it was really the pain on their faces
Yeah.
when they were telling me, because it was like, wow, you love these three individuals so much that you want the best for all of them, just like you want the best for yourself. And then you realize that your issues are having a negative impact on that.
Yeah.
That was painful, because I realized, I was like, wow, especially my kids. I didn't want them to grow up and then have conversations with their future spouses, with, maybe someday grandkids of mine, and say, hey, my dad, your grandpa, whatever, he was a great guy, but he did this. And to some extent, there will be a little bit of that, but it's on me to take the steps necessary to mitigate as much of that going forward. I can't do anything about the past, but I can change the way the future looks for them.
Yep.
And, that's all you can do. But, it probably wasn't just that one event either. I've been into the self-awareness stuff for a while. So I think it was probably building up over time, and it just took that one event to take blinders off.
Yep.
And for me to really see what was going on and see the pain that I was causing, even if it was one day a week, or a couple incidences here and there, it's still pain. It's still their perception, how they felt about it. But a couple things other things I wanted to ask you about was, you've got a breakdown of the acronym PTSD. So can you walk us through that? P, you have perspective. What's your thoughts on that?
Perspective is a remarkable thing. And under a misunderstood and undervalued thing, I think. The ability to look at the same object, right? If you look at it from an artistic point of view, it's the ability to look at an object from different angles, right? And so you have this ball and you hold it up to the light. If you look at the ball with the light behind it, all you're going to see is darkness, right? If you look at the light from or if you look at the ball from the light's perspective, all you see is a shining ball, right? And so I look at that in the same way with mental health, right? If you look at my dad's suicide from the dark side, that is all I will ever see. That's all I'll ever know, right? But what I've done a complete 180 on it, right? I used to think it was the worst moment of my life. And now I look at it and I say it's the most important moment of my life. Is it the best? I'm holding out. I'm going to see what happens, right? Because quite frankly, my own choice of sitting there with a gun in my hand and thinking about suicide, that might have been the best moment of my life. And as dark and dismal as that might be, I didn't do it, right? And that's so.
Now you can't reflect until the book is written, right? That's
exactly.
when you are gone from this world. That's all legacy and all that stuff.
Yeah, and
can't
so
be judged till it's over.
You have to be able to really look at something from a different perspective, and what that means is kind of like the next few pieces of the acronym is one, when you start looking at perspective, you transform, right? And that's the T, the transformation, right? And transformation really is the development of your own understanding, but also the implications of what other people help you understand, right? And that's perspective, because it's incredibly hard to craft perspective outside of within yourself, right? And so you need the help of other people. That's why we read books. That's why as a person that helps people heal, I recommend people read books. I recommend people listen to podcasts. I recommend people go read and understand the stories of other people who've gone through the same thing, because those people have a different perspective. I promise you, right? If you're not healing and they're healing, they have a different perspective than you. Is it the perspective that's going to get you through? I don't know.
Maybe not.
That's why you read, right? That's why you read 100 stories. One of them might matter, might matter, right? This is why you have however many podcast episodes you have. This one might matter to someone where all the rest weren't that good for them, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And so it's that transformative aspect is really about how do you implement perspective into your understanding of the world. Do you think your perception is right? Because I can guarantee you, if you think your perception's right, maybe you're wrong. That's
chance of it.
Yeah, that's the hardest part of all of this, is like, you might actually be wrong. And how do you look at that? Because that's honestly the most transformative piece of this whole structure, right?
And as veterans, we should be pretty good at looking at some of these things. I mean, that's what you do. You're trying to put an operation order together, right? You're trying to look at anything that could go wrong. And look at every piece of it, every angle, basically. So you should be looking at every single angle when you're examining your life.
Yeah. And what's funny about, you bring up op orders, right? You always share an op order up, and then what do people do above you? They tear that thing apart, right? Did you think about this? Did you think about this? And you can never find someone that will say, you know what, this is good. Because like literally when you talk about op orders, there is never a good way to do anything we do in war, right? Because there's always risk, right? There's never a good enough reward to do any of it. If you're any kind of intelligent, you realize that there's always going to be a risk involved when you conduct war. And so there's always going to be someone that says, yeah, what about this? Right. And so it's funny that you bring up that as veterans, we should know this, but we don't. And that's interesting, because we can do it with op orders, but we can't do it with our mental health, right? We can do it with training, but we can't look at ourselves and say, am I looking at this from a perspective that actually functions in my life? And so that's where that transformative aspect is really important. But to really do that, you need the S, right? speak your truth, right? It's simple, right? If you can't learn to articulate your feelings, if you can't learn to articulate how you feel about certain scenarios, uh, outcomes, issues, anything, you will always appease others before you appease yourself, right? And that's not a good thing, right? And if all you do is appease others, what happens, right? Well, I can tell you what happens because I did in Afghanistan. Your body tells you you're falling apart, right? Your body reminds you that you are not invincible, that you cannot support everybody else, and that you have to take care of yourself. That's why I got ulcers, right? And that's why people get fibromyalgia. That's why people uh, are getting cancer at different rates, right? The same kind of population will get cancer simply because how they approach decision making is more for others than it is for them. There's science behind this. There's a great book called When the Body Says No that is revealing some things about the human body that are quite interesting. Um, and so we're getting these physical issues because people can't stand up for themselves, right? Speak your truth. Speak what you know to be true. And what you'll find is that people will look at your perspective and they'll give you their opinion. But again, it's a subjective opinion. It doesn't have to be your truth. And you can engage in maybe looking at myself and having a conversation with myself because I'm a trusted individual that wants to hear your opinion, right? And I'll share mine. And we can have a conversation that's actually respectful and understanding of all of what you've been through. But then you go to your mother and realize she's not the same way, right? And so, you have to determine in many ways who should you respect, which opinion should you respect, which communication style should you respect in that situation. And what a lot of people find, I think, is as they speak their truth, they find that a lot of the people that have been in their lives are actually part of the problem with how they communicate and how they speak their truth because they can't share with some of the people that they currently right now hold in their life because it's quite convenient to have people that serve you and don't ask for anything, right? That's what a lot of us do that struggle through PTSD, struggle through traumas, that we try to appease everybody else. Don't make waves, be seen, not heard, take care of everybody else, right? People please, support, right? Constantly serve everyone. But when we serve ourselves, what happens? Bad things, right? We're selfish, we're narcissists, right? And it's a conversation that needs to be engaged in and how we address selfishness, because selflessness and selfishness are both positive and negative. And we don't really engage in understanding selflessness as negative and selfishness as positive. We don't have those conversations.
Yeah, maybe the conversation is shifted to self-care.
Yeah.
Just a different perception of it because, everybody's on a different path on that. Some people just want to ignore things. Some people try a little bit. Some people, they bury themselves in that. But last one you got is Defy the Darkness.
Yep. And that's,
You-
we kind of already talked about this, and that's that conceptualization of, understanding nature, right? I think you need to understand nature because guess what? It's not going away, right? Death is not going away. Disease is not going away. Violence is not going away. It hasn't gone away. And, however long this earth has been earth, right? And however long humans have been humans. And so you need to understand that darkness is never going to go away, but that doesn't mean you have to succumb to it, right? It's a choice. It's a fundamental choice, right? That's why it's defy the darkness, because defy is a verb, right? You have to choose to defy, right? And so in all of this, it's PTSD can be both remarkably crushing and also incredibly empowering, right? If you choose to allow it to crush you, it will. if you choose to let it empower you, believe me, it will. Right? You can take your trauma and turn it into the most inspiring thing in your life and craft an incredible experience following it. Or you can literally self-destruct. You can destroy yourself, and it will happen. I promise you. If you make that choice, it will happen, and you may not know how far you can go. You may not recognize how far you've gone down that hole until you have someone looking at you and saying, "What happened to you?" Right? Why are you doing this? Right? And if you don't ask that question, sometimes it'll take people, right? Because we can't save everybody, right? I know that. That's the hardest thing about this job, is that as much as I am a vault of information for a lot of people, I also realize that doing so and helping people through this process may also mean that I lose people in the process. And that's part of defying the darkness, is that you have to recognize that not everybody's going to cross the finish line like you will, right? Not everybody's going to finish a marathon. Some may finish a 5K, right? Some may make it 18 miles and then they're gone, right? We all have different places in life where we kick the bucket, and we can't all make it to 95, 100 years old. And there's no guarantee I will, but I'm going to certainly try.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
that part of that is only because I realized what it was like to nearly die at 25 and miss out on all this. I'm 7 years into basically my second life of understanding, like, holy shit, there's an incredible amount of possibilities out there in which I can enjoy, even through all of the darkness. And so you make the choice every single day to keep going, right? If you're tired of fighting, like, figure it out, right? That's what you have to do, right? Start from the beginning. Perception, right? Perspective. Figure out what you are missing, right? Find the transformation. Speak your truth. Whatever you have to do, change what you are doing, and you might learn how to defy that darkness someday.
Absolutely, because there could be many more chapters in your story. And I mean that just generally to everybody who ends up watching or listening, because you just never know when the end of life is. There's so much more to live for. You just gotta press on. But Dylan, I appreciate you coming on here and talking about all this. The incredibly deep episode. I think this is definitely very helpful to a lot of people. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you, Keith.
Anything else to add?
Just don't give up. Just don't give up.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thanks again. I appreciate you.
Likewise. Thank you, Keith.
All right. There you go. Don't forget to check out our website, battlebuddypodcast.net, for all kinds of resources and information. And if you are struggling, remember the National Suicide Hotline number is 800-273-8255, or you can text 838-255. And don't forget to check in on your battle buddies.